Rain hammered the metal awning above the emergency room door so loudly that it felt like the sky itself was collapsing. I was already at the end of a 14-hour shift, my scrubs soaked at the sleeves from running in and out to help paramedics, my hair pulled loose from the bun I had forced it into at the start of the night. I remember thinking that if one more ambulance pulled up, my knees might actually give out. That was when I saw him. A man sitting alone near the sliding doors, drenched from head to toe, water pooling beneath him. His jacket was torn, his jeans stiff with dried mud. He looked like he had not slept in days. His lips trembled with cold, but his eyes were hollow in a way I had seen before in patients who had given up long before their bodies did. I grabbed a spare blanket from the warming cart and walked toward him. Before I could get 3 steps, Janelle, one of the nurses I worked with, appeared beside me with a roll of her eyes. "Do not bother. He is probably here for a warm place to nap until security kicks him out." I ignored her. Compassion was the only thing I still had left to give, even when it made no sense to anyone else. I knelt beside him and draped the blanket around his shoulders. "Sir, can you hear me? Are you in any pain?" He tried to answer, but only a rasp came out, half drowned by the storm and the hum of the ER behind us. His hands shook violently. He looked hungry more than anything. Real hunger, the kind I knew too well. "Let me get you something," I said. When I returned with a small tray of crackers and a cup of soup I had begged from the night cook in the cafeteria, everything erupted at once. Dr. Reynolds, the supervising physician, spotted me. His voice cut across the hallway like a whip. "Nora, what do you think you are doing?" I froze as every head in the room turned. He marched toward me, his white coat flaring behind him. "We do not feed people who are not checked in. We do not use hospital resources on loiterers." My cheeks burned. His blood sugar is low. He is shivering. He needs help. He needs a ride to a shelter, not a meal paid for by this hospital. You are not paid to be a charity worker. Before I could respond, a different voice sliced through the tension. A voice that twisted my stomach in ways I wish it no longer could. Of course it is her. I recognized the tone before I even lifted my eyes. Ryan, my ex. Tall, polished, wearing that expensive watch I had once saved up 3 months to buy him as a birthday gift. His hair was perfect. His smirk even more so. He crossed his arms and looked at me with the same disgust I had tried for years to ignore. "This is embarrassing, Nora. Absolutely embarrassing. Feeding homeless strangers while you can barely pay your own bills." He spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. My coworkers stared. Patients stared. Even the man wrapped in the blanket stared. Heat crawled up my neck. Ryan stepped closer. "Do you know how pathetic this looks? Helping people like him while you barely survive. You make me ashamed I ever cared about you." My throat tightened. I steadied the tray in my shaking hands. The man looked up at me, eyes wide, as though he thought I might drop everything and walk away. But I did not. I bent down and handed him the spoon. "Here," I said quietly. "Eat slowly." Ryan scoffed in disbelief. Dr. Reynolds exploded again. "Nora, that is enough. Give the food to security. Clock out, now." Someone in the waiting room murmured, "What kind of nurse wastes time on people like that?" Another voice said, "She is desperate. Look at her. Her shoes are falling apart." Laughter rippled. Not loud, but enough to cut. My shoes really were falling apart. I felt humiliation prickle beneath my skin like fire. The man shivered harder, and that was the moment something inside me refused to break, even when everyone expected it to. I placed the tray into his trembling hands. "I do not care what anyone thinks. You deserve to be treated like a human being." His gaze softened, as if the words meant something he had not heard in a long time. For a brief moment, the world around us seemed to pause. Ryan looked disgusted. Dr. Reynolds looked furious. Janelle shook her head as though I was throwing my career into the gutter. Maybe I was. Maybe I had nothing left to lose. But I stood there anyway, the storm raging behind me and the storm inside me barely contained. They all looked at me like I was doing something wrong, but for the first time in years, I knew I was not. And I had no idea that using the last dollars in my wallet to help a stranger would be the spark that set my entire life on fire only weeks later. The morning after the storm felt heavier than the storm itself, as if the sky had pressed its weight against my chest and refused to lift. I dragged myself into the staff entrance of the hospital, still replaying the humiliation from the night before, every word Ryan had thrown at me sticking like wet ash. The moment I placed my bag in my locker, the charge nurse Luann approached with a stiff envelope in her hand and an expression that made my stomach twist. "Nora, you need to read this." My fingers trembled as I opened it. A formal disciplinary warning, a consequence of inappropriate use of hospital resources. A note stating I was suspended from overtime for 30 days. Overtime was how I paid for groceries, for rent, for the gas that took me back and forth between work and home, for the medication my mother's insurance refused to cover. Losing it was like losing oxygen in a room already too tight. I swallowed hard and nodded, even though I felt myself splinter inside. Luann sighed in sympathy, but sympathy did not pay bills. I headed to my station while nurses whispered behind clipboards. "She brought food to a homeless guy. What did she think would happen? She always acts like she's better than policy. Maybe she wanted attention." Their words rolled off me in ways that suggested I should have been used to it by now. Maybe I was, but that did not make the sting any softer. By noon, exhaustion tugged at my body with every step. I had 3 new patients, 2 IVs to start, and an elderly woman trembling through a panic attack because she had no one to sit with her. I held her hand until she calmed, even though Dr. Reynolds shot me another glare for taking too long on non-critical cases. I could feel myself unraveling. My eyes burned. My legs ached. When I finally reached the supply cabinet to restock, I leaned my head against the cool metal just for a moment. The next thing I knew, someone was shaking me awake. Luann again. "Nora, you fell asleep standing. Go splash water on your face, please." I apologized, cheeks hot from embarrassment. But the truth was, I had not slept more than 4 hours in the past 2 days. My mother had been up all night gritting her teeth through pain she refused to describe because she did not want me to worry. She needed a new medication, one not covered by insurance. $280 for a 1-week supply. I checked my bank balance that morning, $47.18, half a tank of gas, 3 eggs left in the fridge, 2 days until payday. As I washed my face in the tiny staff bathroom, I stared at my reflection under the harsh fluorescent lights. My eyes were rimmed red. My hair looked like it had survived a wind tunnel. The corners of my mouth were tight with the effort of not crying. I did not recognize the woman looking back at me. When my shift finally ended at sunset, the sky was bruised purple and orange, the kind of beauty that made me feel even smaller in contrast. I walked out, pulling my thin jacket tight around me. The air had turned cold. A security guard glanced at me and nodded. Another looked me up and down with a confused squint, probably assuming from my worn shoes and tired face that I was one of the homeless people who wandered the lot at night. I understood why. Sometimes I felt barely one step away from joining them. At the bus stop, a woman waiting nearby clutched her purse closer when I sat down. I opened my phone, checked the time for the next route, and ignored the sting of her reaction. The world was quick to judge anyone who looked like they had fallen behind. My bus dropped me off 3 blocks from my apartment. On the way, I stopped at the pharmacy to ask again if there were cheaper generic options for my mother's medication. The pharmacist shook his head. "Insurance will not cover the alternative." "I am sorry." I walked home in silence. The neighborhood I lived in was a place where car alarms went off for no reason and where the streetlights flickered like dying fireflies. My apartment building smelled faintly of damp carpet and old paint. As I climbed the stairs, my phone buzzed. It was my mom. Her voice was weak when she answered. "Nora, honey, you sound tired. Did you eat today?" I pressed my eyes shut, leaning my forehead against the wall. "I am fine, Mom. How is your pain?" She tried to lie. I heard it. Mothers always think they can soften reality for their children. "It is manageable, sweetie. I am okay." The tremor beneath her words said otherwise. When I hung up, guilt and helplessness wrapped around my chest like a chain. I unlocked my apartment door, the warm, stale air greeting me with the familiar scent of cheap candles and worn furniture. I set my bag down, kicked off my ruined shoes, and let myself collapse onto the couch. For a minute, I closed my eyes. I told myself not to cry. I failed. Tears slid down my cheeks in a slow, quiet stream. The humiliation, the exhaustion, the fear, the unfairness of choosing between electricity and medicine. It all hit me at once until I could barely breathe. I wiped my face and stood forcing myself toward the kitchen. I opened the cabinet looking for something to eat. 2 packets of instant ramen, a half-empty jar of peanut butter, a stale loaf of bread. I chose ramen. As I waited for the water to boil, I caught my reflection in the microwave door. Still the same tired stranger. I reached for my scrubs to start a load of laundry, but my fingers brushed something tucked into the side pocket. A small yellow slip, the cafeteria receipt from last night. Soup, crackers, my last $5. I held it in my hand. That man, those hollow eyes, that quiet thank you. It was the only moment in the last 24 hours that had felt right. But kindness does not pay bills. Kindness does not fix policy. Kindness does not lift you out when the world is kicking you down. I knew that, and yet something inside me whispered that what I had done mattered, even if no one else believed it. I threw away the receipt and sat at the table with my ramen. My hands shook when I lifted the first bite. I ate in silence until the quiet was interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. 3 short taps, firm, unexpected. My heart lurched. No one knocked at my door this late. No one visited me at all. I stood, slowly walked toward the door, and when I opened it, the hallway was empty. But on the ground lay a single white envelope. My name written on the front in clean, careful letters. Nora Hayes. That was the moment I felt my entire life shift just a fraction, but enough that I would remember it forever. I held the envelope like it might dissolve in my hand if I blinked too hard, its weight both too light to be ordinary mail and too heavy to be harmless. My breath fogged the air in the dim hallway as I stood there listening for footsteps, a voice, anything, nothing, just the low hum of the flickering fluorescent light above me. I brought the envelope inside, locked the door behind me, and sat at the small, wobbly dining table. My fingers hesitated before sliding under the flap. The paper tore softly, almost reluctantly, and inside was a single folded sheet. No cash, no threats, no signatures. Just one handwritten note on thick cream stationery. Thank you for treating me like a human. I froze. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, almost elegant, not the kind you'd expect from someone fighting for survival on the streets. A faint shiver trailed down my spine. I read the line again. Thank you for treating me like a human. My mind immediately flashed back to the man I had helped in the ER barely 24 hours earlier. Rain-soaked clothes, blue-tinged lips, the weary, guarded eyes that softened when I handed him the crackers. The way his voice broke on that quiet thank you. A warmth had flickered in his eyes, then brief but unmistakable, like he couldn't remember the last time someone looked at him without pity or judgment. But why would he come here? How would he even know where I lived? And why leave only a note? My stomach tightened. Was he watching me? Following me? Or was this simply gratitude, nothing more? I folded the note carefully, unsure whether to keep it or tear it to pieces, and slid it into a drawer. But long after I tried to return to bed, my mind refused to rest. I lay awake, listening to the distant sirens and the rattling pipes, wondering who he really was. The next morning, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin as I waited for the bus outside my apartment building. The cold settled deep in my bones. I hugged myself, my eyes burning from too little sleep and too many unanswered questions. That was when I saw him again. At first, I didn't recognize him. He stood across the street near the bench wearing a clean gray hoodie and dark jeans instead of the torn jacket from the ER. His hair was still damp, pushed back from his forehead. He looked different, more put together, more like someone who'd had a warm bed to sleep in, a hot shower. When he lifted his head, our eyes locked. My heartbeat stuttered. It was him, the man from the ER. His gaze flicked away almost instantly, as if he hadn't expected me to be there, as if he'd been debating whether to approach me or disappear before I noticed. Against my better judgment, I crossed the street. The closer I got, the more the contradictions stood out. His posture didn't match the posture of someone who'd lived on the streets for years. His hands, now clean, showed no deep calluses. His eyes, though tired, held clarity rather than the dull, worn look most unhoused patients carried from too many nights of fear and cold. "Who are you really?" I stopped a few feet away, unsure how close he'd tolerate. He cleared his throat, eyes lowering with a mixture of shyness and caution. "I wanted to return these." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, crumpled snack wrapper I'd given him the night before. Crackers. It was empty now, folded neatly along every seam. My breath caught. I blinked. "You didn't have to find me for that." He shrugged slightly. "You gave me your last dollars. I didn't want that hanging over me. I wasn't sure if I should laugh or cry." I crossed my arms partly for warmth and partly to steady myself. "The note. Was that from you?" His eyes lifted, and for a moment something like embarrassment crossed his face. "Yes. I realized I left too suddenly last night. I didn't want you to think I was ungrateful." That single sentence struck me harder than I expected. Not ungrateful. People rarely cared whether a nurse felt appreciated. We were furniture that moved, lifted, monitored, cleaned, and disappeared when not needed. Gratitude wasn't required, but he had cared. "Why did you leave like that?" His jaw tensed slightly and he glanced away toward the passing traffic. "Habit, I guess. I don't stay anywhere long." Something in his tone told me not to push further. The bus arrived behind me with a low groan of brakes. "I should go," I said softly. He nodded once, almost formal. "Take care, Nora." I froze. "How do you know my name?" He blinked, confused for a second, then his expression softened. "The badge on your scrubs." "Right. Of course." My heart raced for no reason. I turned to step onto the bus, but something tugged inside me, something that had made me kneel beside him in the ER, despite the stares, the scolding, the storm. I glanced back. "Will you be okay?" His lips twitched a faint, tired smile. "I have been worse, but thank you for asking." The sincerity in his voice warmed something in me I hadn't realized had gone cold. As the bus pulled away, I watched him shrink in the distance until he disappeared behind a row of parked cars. I told myself not to think about him again, not to wonder where he slept, whether he ate, whether he had anyone in the world who cared about him. I told myself it didn't matter. But people like him had a way of slipping into the quiet corners of your thoughts, a way of making you question everything you assumed you knew. Over the next few days, I found myself scanning the sidewalks during my commute, searching crowds without consciously deciding to. And each time I didn't see him, a small ache bloomed inside my chest, sharp and inexplicable. It made no sense. He was a stranger, a brief intersection in my life, a flicker of warmth in the middle of a cold, unforgiving week. That was all. And yet I remembered the way he looked at me in the ER, like the simple act of treating him with respect had startled him. I remembered the careful handwriting on the note. I remembered the empty cracker wrapper he had carried. People don't hold on to crumbs unless they hold on to meaning. One evening, as I sat with my mom while she slept, her breathing slow and heavy, I found myself whispering aloud, almost without thinking, "I hope he's safe." I didn't know then that this man with no address and no past I could identify was about to change every part of my life. I didn't know that the envelope on my doorstep had only been the first ripple in a wave that would carry me places I never expected to go. I didn't know that kindness, a small, fragile ember I had tried my whole life not to let the world extinguish, was about to come back to me in a way I never imagined. I didn't know anything, but I would. Soon. I should have known the universe wasn't done with me yet. Hope is a fragile thing, and mine had barely begun to breathe again when the next blow landed so hard it knocked every bit of air from my chest. It started with a phone call from my mother's doctor just as my shift was ending, my body already trembling with exhaustion after 12 straight hours on my feet. His voice was tense, too calm in that way doctors get when they are delivering news that is supposed to be professional but feels like a punch to whoever is listening. "Nora, the medication your mother needs. The new one we discussed. Insurance denied coverage? Again." I closed my eyes, squeezing the bridge of my nose to stop the sting forming behind them. How much? There was a pause, the kind that tells you the number is going to hurt before you even hear it. 1,700 a month. My pulse stuttered. That was more than half my paycheck. Rent was already late. Groceries were bought by counting coins and pretending it was a game. My mother was still recovering from last month's scare. And now this. I whispered a thank you, hung up, and sat in the break room staring at the beige wall like it might offer me an escape. It didn't. Moments later, trouble found me again. I was charting notes, trying to keep my vision steady through the blur of exhaustion, when the nurse manager walked in with the tight smile that never meant anything good. "Nora, we need to talk in my office." My stomach clenched. Inside, she shut the door with a quiet click, sat down, and folded her hands. "You made an error in your documentation yesterday. A date was written wrong." I blinked slowly, feeling my pulse crawl upward. "I fixed it." Yes, after it was flagged. But under the new zero-tolerance accuracy policy, even corrected errors require consequences. I felt something inside me sink, like the floor was slipping. She didn't hesitate. "We're cutting your next paycheck by 20%. A cold wave washed over me. 20%, I felt sick, Nurse managers weren't cruel on purpose. They were following rules made by people who had never spent a night in an ER, never held a dying patient's hand, never balanced compassion against chronically low staffing. But that didn't make the blow any softer. My mouth opened to argue, to beg to plead, but all that came out was a shaky breath. She offered a sympathetic tilt of her head, a gesture that only made me feel smaller. I walked out of her office feeling like a ghost. The hallway spun. I clung to the wall for balance. And the world, as if sensing weakness, decided to press harder. As I left the hospital, the sky opened into a relentless sheet of cold rain, soaking my scrubs within seconds. I didn't have money for an Uber. I didn't even have enough for a bus until payday. So I walked. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I finally reached my apartment building, drenched and shivering, the landlord was waiting at the front door with an expression that chilled me deeper than the storm. "Nora, we need to talk. Not now, please, not now." My mind begged, but trouble doesn't wait for convenience. He crossed his arms. "Rent was due last week." "I know," I whispered. "I'm working on it." He sighed. "I like you, Nora, but I can't afford to wait anymore. If I don't have payment in 2 days, I'll have to start the eviction process." 2 days. Just 2. I nodded numb and climbed the stairs as if carrying cement. When I pushed open the apartment door, my mother looked up from the couch, her smile soft despite the shadows under her eyes. "Hey, honey, you're soaked. Bad shift." "Yes," I breathed, kneeling to help adjust her blanket. But when she asked how bad, I lied, because she didn't need more worry. She didn't need to know that the world she depended on me to hold up was collapsing fast. After she fell asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the bills spread like white flags of surrender. My chest tightened with each number I couldn't pay. 1,700 for meds, rent overdue, pay cut incoming. My bank account barely breathing. My hands trembled as I pressed them to my face. I didn't cry. I didn't have room left for tears. And just when I thought the night couldn't get worse, it found a way. My phone buzzed. Ryan, my ex, the last person on earth I wanted to talk to. My gut twisted as I hesitated, then answered. His voice spilled through the line, smooth with entitlement. "I heard you're in trouble. Word travels fast in hospitals." I swallowed a bitter taste. "I'm fine." He chuckled. "No, you're not, and you know it. Why don't you stop pretending you can do this alone?" His arrogance was a familiar poison. He continued. "You should have stayed with me, Nora. You wouldn't be drowning right now." My grip tightened around the phone. "Please don't do this. He cut me off. "Come back to me and I'll fix everything. My father's on the hospital board. I can restore your pay. We'll get your mother into a better facility. You don't have to struggle." My voice trembled. "I'm not a transaction, Ryan." His tone sharpened. "Then stop acting like one." Silence slammed into me. He pushed harder. "I saw your little show with the homeless man. Do you think that makes you look noble? It makes you look desperate." I closed my eyes, feeling something twist inside me, raw and wounded. He wasn't done. No matter how much you try, you're nothing without someone like me." The words struck like a slap. I hung up, numb, shaking, furious, alone. I stared at the wall, at the peeling paint, at the shadows trembling under the weak kitchen light. Something inside me cracked quietly, painfully. Everything was falling apart. Everything was slipping. And then, at the very moment the night hit its darkest point, I heard it. A soft sound. An envelope sliding under the door. Again. My breath froze in my chest. Slowly I stood. Slowly I walked toward it. Slowly I reached down and picked it up. My fingers shook as I turned it over. No name, no stamp, just like before. My heart pounded loud enough to echo in my ears. I whispered into the silence. Not again. But it was. Another envelope, another mystery, another shift in my fate. I stared at the envelope lying on my kitchen floor as if it were a snake coiled and waiting to strike. My fingers hesitated in the air above it, trembling with the memory of the last one. The first envelope had saved my mother's life for another month. It had also shaken the already tilting ground beneath my feet. And now here was another. Same color, same thin weight, same anonymous presence, same impossible kindness, or impossible danger. I bent down slowly, my breath shallow, and picked it up. The paper was cold against my fingertips, almost damp from where it had slipped in from the hallway. I held it for a long moment, staring, unable to open it. My mind spun with every worst-case scenario. Was this from the same man? Was someone watching me? Was it some twisted trap? But then I remembered the note that came with the first envelope. For your mother's care. Thank you for treating me like a human. A friend. My throat tightened. That night in the ER rushed back like a wave breaking against a shore. The rain, his soaked hair, his trembling body. The way he had whispered thank you like those 2 words cost him something. The look in his eyes when I handed him the crackers I paid for with my very last dollar. The quiet dignity beneath the exhaustion. He never gave me his name. He slipped out before sunrise like a ghost carrying secrets. But he hadn't forgotten me. At least, that's what my heart wanted to believe. My mind, however, whispered warnings. This could ruin your life. This could be illegal. This could be dangerous. Still, my fingers slid beneath the flap, tearing it open. A soft whisper of paper. My hands shook as I pulled out the contents, another cashier's check. My breath caught. This time for $60,000. $60,000. My knees buckled and I collapsed into the nearest chair, the check fluttering in my lap like a fragile bird. $60,000 was more money than I had seen in my lifetime, more money than my entire annual salary, more money than I could even process while half-starved and half-broken from the day. I pressed a trembling hand over my mouth. My mother's medication. A year of treatment, rent for months, food, transportation, a chance to breathe, a chance to save her, a chance to save myself. But how? How could any stranger afford this? And why me? There was another note. Just one line this time. Typed. Simple. You deserve help too. My heart twisted painfully. No name, no explanation, no conditions. Just that. You deserve help too. I didn't remember the last time anyone said something like that to me. I didn't remember the last time anyone saw me as someone worth saving. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. I wiped them away with the back of my hand, but they kept coming. I didn't sob. It wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet kind of crying that comes from exhaustion so deep it lives in your bones. But fear crept in too. Why would someone give me this? People don't give money without wanting something. Not in this world. Not in America, where every favor has a price tag and every kindness hides an invoice. I kept scanning the note, the check, the envelope, searching for a clue, a threat, anything. But there was nothing. Just my name typed neatly. Just money that could save everything. Just the weight of a kindness I couldn't explain. After a long time, I forced myself to stand. I grabbed my keys and left my apartment, walking quickly as if outrunning my own thoughts. I needed answers. I needed the truth. At the bank, the teller ran the check through verification while I waited, sweating and shaking so hard I thought the floor might tilt. She finally looked up and nodded. It's real. Relief crashed into me so hard I had to grip the counter to steady myself. Would you like to deposit it? She asked. The question felt surreal, like she was asking if I wanted to swallow the moon. After a moment, I nodded numbly. The check disappeared behind the glass and into my account. Just like that, the balance on my phone changed from terrifying to something I could breathe around. But my questions stayed. Heavy. Loud. After leaving the bank, I walked without knowing where I was going until I found myself back at the bus stop. The same one. The one where I saw him standing in the rain. The place where he returned the empty cracker wrapper to me as if wrapping up a piece of gratitude. I sat on the bench, wrapping my arms around myself, staring at every passing stranger as if one of them would suddenly reveal the truth. My voice cracked in the cold air. Who are you? No one answered. A bus roared by, splashing my shoes with dirty water. Rain began to fall again, light at first, then heavier until the whole world blurred into soft gray. I didn't move. Couldn't move. The storm soaked into my clothes until I was shivering, but part of me felt like I needed to be here, sitting in the memory of the moment everything quietly shifted. An elderly woman passing by glanced at me with concern. Honey, you okay? I managed a weak smile. I will be. She nodded knowingly, the way only people who've lived long enough recognize a life turning point. The rain eased. I stood chest tight, mind spinning. Someone was helping me, watching me, caring in a way no one had in years. But why me? Why now? When I returned home, the apartment was quiet. My mother was asleep. Everything looked exactly the same as it did before, but everything inside me was different when I finally lay down on my bed, soaked clothes clinging to my skin. I whispered to the empty room, "Thank you, whoever you are." Then, for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. And the next morning when I woke, I saw something I had not seen in a very long time. A sliver of hope. But I didn't know yet that this envelope was only the beginning. The envelope should have been the last surprise, the final twist in a month filled with storms, humiliation, and strange acts of kindness I did not feel I deserved. But life doesn't move in straight lines. It bends and coils and doubles back on you when you least expect it, especially when you are too tired to brace yourself. The morning after depositing the $60,000 felt unreal in a quiet way. Not joyful, not triumphant, just lighter, like someone had lifted a cinder block off my chest while I slept. I made my mother's breakfast a real one this time instead of the instant noodles we had lived on for weeks. She noticed immediately, her eyes narrowing. "What happened?" she asked, suspicious but hopeful. I lied, gently telling her the hospital finally adjusted some of her treatment costs. She nodded slowly, choosing to believe me because believing was easier than probing. I wanted to hold on to that peace for as long as possible. But peace rarely lasts. Not for people like me. At the hospital, everyone seemed to know I was walking differently. Not physically. There was just something softer in my face, something unburdened. People noticed these things. Misery loves company, and ER nurses recognized the slightest break in the pattern. Alicia cornered me in the supply closet. "You look not dead inside," she whispered like it was a scandal. I laughed, and the sound surprised both of us. "Rough night?" she asked. "Actually, not rough." She squinted. "Okay, now I'm worried." Before I could answer, the overhead speaker called her to triage, leaving me alone with a stack of IV bags and my buzzing thoughts. Later that afternoon, after a mercifully calm shift, the charge nurse handed me a sealed envelope with my name on it. My stomach dropped. Not again. But this one wasn't the cheap white paper from earlier. It was thick, embossed with the hospital's crest in gold. "Came from upstairs," she said. "Some board thing." My pulse throbbed in my ears. Upstairs meant administration. Or worse, legal. I forced a steady breath and opened it. Inside was a formal invitation printed on heavy cardstock. You are cordially invited to the Westbridge General Annual Charity Gala. I blinked. It didn't make sense. Regular nurses did not get invited, especially nurses who got pay cuts and reprimands. I flipped the card over and froze at the small printed note attached to the corner. Your ticket has been generously sponsored by an anonymous donor. My knees nearly gave out. Him. It had to be. The man from the ER. The man with the tired eyes and the careful voice. The man who slipped out before dawn and mailed life-changing checks without leaving a name. A strange warmth filled my chest, a mix of bewilderment and fear, and something dangerously close to longing. But then reality slammed back. A gala meant fancy clothes, expensive gowns, hair and makeup, shoes that didn't have holes, people I used to know, people like Ryan looking down on me under chandelier light. I stuffed the invitation into my scrub's pocket and tried to forget about it. For 2 days it haunted me like a song stuck on repeat. I didn't belong in places like that. I barely belonged anywhere. Maybe the donor paid for the ticket by mistake. Maybe he meant it for someone else. Maybe I should ignore the whole thing. But then Alicia found the invitation while helping me fold laundry in the staff room. "Oh my God," she gasped, holding it like it might explode. "You're going!" "I can't afford a dress," I said. "Then you'll borrow mine. I can't show up looking like I crashed the event. Nora, he gave you $60,000. You can show up wearing a trash bag and still be the most valuable person in the room." She had a point. And so 2 nights later, I stood in her tiny apartment wearing a deep blue gown that hugged and softened all the right places. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't sparkly or backless or dramatic. It was simple, elegant, borrowed, and almost made me look like a woman who wasn't drowning. "You look like a CEO's wife," Alicia said proudly. "I look like someone pretending to be a CEO's wife," I corrected, adjusting the strap for the 10th time. "Same thing," she replied, handing me a clutch. My stomach churned the entire Uber ride to the Westbridge Grand Hotel. I'd seen the building before, towering above everything like polished marble ambition. But stepping out of the car onto a red carpet bordered by photographers made my breath lock in my lungs. Beautiful people glided past me, doctors' wives in sparkling gowns, hospital board members in tuxedos, wealth hanging off every wrist and shoulder. When I checked in at the front desk, the hostess scanned my invitation and smiled politely. "Your sponsor has already arrived." My heart slammed against my ribs. My sponsor. Yes, he requested that we notify him the moment you checked in. Heat crept up my neck. He was here, watching, waiting. Why? What did he want from me? I followed the stream of guests into the ballroom. Hundreds of candles flickered inside crystal vases. The chandeliers dripped gold light. A string quartet played something soft and floating. I felt like Cinderella dropped into a palace without instructions. People whispered as I passed. Not because they recognized me, because they sensed something out of place, something that didn't fit. The air shifted. The host walked onto the illuminated stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "please welcome our largest donor this year." The spotlight snapped on, cutting a bright path across the ballroom. My gaze followed it. My breath stopped. There he was, not ragged, not shaking, not lost. He stood tall, calm, devastatingly composed in a tailored black suit, clean-shaven, confident. A man who clearly belonged in every inch of this glittering world. But his eyes, those were the same, gentle, heavy with storms. He lifted his head and scanned the room. Then his gaze landed on me, held me, pinned me in place, and the whole ballroom faded. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just looked at me like he had been waiting for this moment, waiting for me. The host continued speaking, but I couldn't hear him over the pounding of my heart. The man from the ER, the man in rags, my unnamed friend, he was here, and he was nothing like I thought. The room went silent in the kind of way that is loud, where you feel the quiet more than you hear it. Every rustle of fabric, every clink of a glass stopped. The air tightened like everyone had inhaled at the same time. I felt it in my spine before my mind fully registered what was happening. The man on stage, the man I had met in the ER on the worst night of his life and mine. The man who shivered under fluorescent lights and whispered thank you. Like it hurt him to say it, stood there beneath the chandelier glow as if he had always belonged in that spotlight. He didn't look like the trembling stranger I wrapped a towel around. He didn't look like someone who had slept on cold pavement or walked through a storm with nothing but thin fabric to shield him. No, he looked like someone carved out of quiet authority. Someone who had spent his entire life being watched, being deferred to being expected to lead. His hair was neatly styled, his jaw cleanly shaven, his posture straight but not stiff. But it was his eyes that made my breath falter. They were the same soft eyes from the ER, the ones that carried exhaustion and pain, and that impossible spark of dignity even when everything else about him looked broken. He found me instantly. I don't know how. The ballroom was packed with glittering donors and prestigious doctors and elegantly dressed families, but he found me in less than a second, as if he had been searching for only one person. And when his gaze locked on mine, something inside me cracked open. Recognition, relief, fear, gratitude. Something like longing but buried deep, deep where I didn't dare touch it. The host's voice boomed again. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our distinguished guest and primary benefactor for this year's charity fund, Mr. Caleb Rowan. Caleb. His name hit me like a soft collision I wasn't prepared for. Caleb Rowan. That name wasn't unfamiliar. I had heard it before in hallway whispers about business news and articles shared online about philanthropic ventures, the kind of name that sat comfortably next to words like investment firm or legacy wealth or heir. My stomach twisted. He wasn't just well off. He wasn't just comfortable. He was the Caleb Rowan, one of those people whose money made shapes in the world. The applause rose around me, a wave I stood outside of. He didn't smile exactly, but his lips tilted in acknowledgement before he leaned toward the microphone. His voice was deeper, steadier than I remembered. Good evening. Thank you all for your generosity and for supporting a cause that matters more than most people will ever understand. People nodded. Some murmured soft agreement. He continued, but his eyes kept drifting back to me as though making sure I was still there, as though scared I might disappear like he once had. This year, he said, my contribution is not just financial. It is personal. A ripple spread across the crowd. Personal in a room full of egos meant something raw was coming. My heart pounded against the borrowed fabric of my gown. Months ago, he said I found myself in a place I never imagined I would be. Not physically, emotionally. His voice tightened like each word cost him something. I had lost trust in people, in intentions, in everything that used to feel stable. Several heads tilted, listening more closely. Wealth doesn't make you immune to loss. Sometimes it magnifies it. So I did something reckless, he said. I stepped away from my life. I wanted to know whether kindness still existed in the world when no one knew my name, my history, or my bank account. A few guests exchanged looks. I didn't blink. I was afraid that if I blinked, I would wake up somewhere else. I lived quietly, anonymously. Nothing about it was glamorous. Most people didn't look at me twice. He paused, except one. A soft hush moved through the ballroom. He was looking at me again so openly this time it felt like a hand on my chest. One person saw me as human, not as a burden, not as a liar, not as someone taking up space he didn't deserve. Heat crept up my neck. I gripped my clutch tighter, my pulse roaring. One nurse, he continued, gave me her last few dollars so I could eat. She advocated for me when others dismissed me. She treated me with dignity at a time when I had none left to claim for myself. People began turning, glancing around the room, already searching for the unnamed nurse. I felt my entire body flush with the kind of embarrassment that feels like a spotlight even when you are sitting in the dark. Her name, Caleb, said, his voice steady but thickening slightly, is Nora Hayes. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, heads whipping around, cameras turning. My breath left my lungs in a silent rush. I felt every eye land on me with the force of a physical impact. And yet through all the noise I heard only the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. My chair scraped the floor as I slowly rose, my legs trembling like they couldn't decide whether to hold me up or collapse entirely. Caleb stepped away from the podium. He didn't move toward me yet, as if waiting for my permission, as if afraid that approaching too soon might spook me. People made space between us without realizing it, creating a narrow aisle I felt pushed into by a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something that felt frighteningly like destiny. When I took my first step toward him, the ballroom seemed to inhale again. Every footstep felt like it belonged to someone else, someone braver than me. As I reached the halfway point, Caleb finally moved, slow, measured, controlled. But his eyes betrayed him. They softened with every inch that closed between us. When we stood an arm's length apart, the world shrank to just the two of us. Nora, he said quietly, meant only for me, though hundreds watched. My name in his voice felt different, warmer, weighted, seen. You changed my life, he said. I didn't know how to tell you. My throat tightened. You disappeared, I whispered, not trusting my volume. I know, he said, guilt flickering across his face. I wasn't ready to be known yet, but I came back. I swallowed hard. You didn't have to. He shook his head, a faint smile of disbelief in himself. Yes, I did. The silence between us hummed with unanswered questions, unspoken truths, and a connection neither of us knew how to name yet. But for the first time in weeks, maybe months, something inside me didn't feel broken. It felt seen, held, and as the ballroom waited with bated breath for what would happen next, I felt the unmistakable sense that my life had just split into two parts before this moment and after it. For a moment, the world felt suspended as if the chandeliers above us held their breath with the rest of the ballroom. Caleb stood close enough that I could see the faint stress lines near his eyes, lines that had not been visible the night I found him drenched and trembling in the ER. Those lines told a fuller story than his tuxedo ever could. He gestured gently toward the side of the room, away from the cameras and the hungry stares of donors who were already whispering theories. I followed him through a quiet corridor lit by soft amber sconces until we reached a smaller lounge room empty except for two velvet chairs and a long table of untouched desserts. The door clicked shut behind us, dulling the noise of the gala to a faraway hum. My pulse still hadn't steadied. Caleb exhaled a long, slow breath as if he had been holding it all evening. I wanted to tell you in private first, he said, before the room spun the story into something it wasn't. I crossed my arms partly to steady myself, partly to guard the chaotic rise of emotions crowding inside me. So, tell me. He nodded once, but didn't speak immediately. He ran a hand over his jaw, the gesture almost nervous, which felt strangely human for a man who had just commanded an entire ballroom with a few sentences. When you met me, he said finally, I wasn't really homeless. I let out a soft, humorless breath. I gathered that from the tux. His lips curved for a moment, but the sadness in his eyes didn't fade. I had been living on the streets for a few weeks. That part was real. I didn't have a home because I walked away from mine. I didn't have anything because I didn't want anything that belonged to the life I left behind. I blinked, trying to reconcile this calm, steady man with the broken figure who'd clung to his chest in pain. Why? His gaze drifted toward the closed door, not as if he wanted to leave, but as if searching for the right place in his memory. My sister, he said quietly, died last year. The words sliced through the room and stilled every thought in my head. She had a rare autoimmune condition. We did everything right, but sometimes everything isn't enough. His voice tightened but didn't break. She was the only person in my family who cared about me without wanting something from me. Everyone else saw me as an asset, an extension of the Rowan legacy. I'd heard of the Rowan family. Everyone had. They built half the charitable hospitals on the East Coast. They also funded political campaigns and controlled foundations with billions. After she died, Caleb continued. I couldn't breathe around them. They wanted me to fill her place on the board to attend events to sign off on projects I didn't believe in. They wanted to parade me around like a trophy, the heir who would keep everyone else rich. His hands slowly clenched, and all I wanted was to be a person again, not a brand. My heart squeezed. I knew something about losing yourself inside the expectations of others. "So you walked away," I said softly. I did. I took a backpack, some clothes, and left everything else behind. I wanted to know what people saw when I had nothing. I needed to know whether genuine kindness still existed in the world, or whether it died with my sister. His eyes met mine. And then I met you. The room seemed to contract around us. I swallowed. "You were in real pain that night. You could have died." He nodded. I had been ignoring symptoms for days. I was dehydrated, exhausted, not thinking clearly. "I went to your ER because I couldn't stay upright anymore." "Why didn't you tell us who you were?" He gave a small, almost apologetic shrug. "Because then you wouldn't have treated me the way you did." A beat passed between us, charged, fragile, and impossibly intimate. "You didn't hesitate to help me," he said quietly. "When your coworker mocked me, you ignored her. When the doctor brushed me off, you insisted I be seen. You used your last few dollars to feed me." His voice softened until it nearly broke. "You treated me like I mattered. No one had done that since my sister." A lump rose painfully in my throat. I took a breath, but it wavered. "So, the check, the invitation, all of this was from you?" "Yes." He stepped closer, not touching me, but near enough that I felt the warmth of his presence. I didn't disappear because I didn't care. I disappeared because I was ashamed. I left the hospital still dizzy, but terrified that if I stayed, you would see through me too quickly, and I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to be that man again, the one whose name meant something to everyone except himself. I looked down at my hands. "You could have come back. I wanted to," he whispered. "Every day." A silence settled, heavy but not hostile. Instead, it felt like two storms finally acknowledging each other. I lifted my eyes. "Why tell the whole world tonight?" He hesitated, then said, "Because when I screened the guest list and saw your name reserved by an anonymous sponsor, I realized hiding was not protecting either of us. It was destroying my chance to thank the person who changed my life when I had nothing to offer." My breath stuttered. "You didn't owe me anything." "Nora," he said gently, "debt isn't the word I'd use. Gratitude, maybe. Admiration, definitely." My pulse kicked at the last word. I looked away, trying to gather myself, but he stepped into my line of sight again, not forcefully, just sincerely. "I know this is a lot," he said, "and I know it might scare you. You have every right to walk out of this room right now, but I wanted you to know the truth before the media twists it, before my family questions you, before anything else touches the story that belongs to us." "Us," I repeated. He didn't flinch. "Yes, us." My chest tightened so sharply I had to inhale slowly. This man who once sat shivering in a thin jacket now stood in front of me with honesty so raw it felt like a wound half-healed, and yet a flicker of fear still pulsed in my mind. "What happens now?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he offered his hand, palm open, steady, warm, patient. "Now," he said, "I show you the rest of the truth." My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I stared at his hand, at the quiet certainty in his eyes, at the life he represented, the life I had never imagined brushing against mine. And then slowly I placed my hand in his. The moment our fingers touched, something shifted inside me like a door opening. This was no longer about a mystery or an act of kindness or a man in rags who wasn't really poor. This was about two people who had been broken in different ways, finding something unexpectedly gentle in each other. "Come with me," he said softly. "There's more you need to see." The walk back into the ballroom felt like stepping into a hurricane made of eyes. Every face turned toward us as Caleb guided me through the side corridor and into the golden light of the gala. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne flutes hovered in frozen hands. Flashes from phones and cameras burst like silent lightning. I felt my pulse spike so sharply that for a moment I couldn't hear anything except the thudding in my ears. Caleb's hand pressed gently against the small of my back, steadying me, but his touch only made the attention feel heavier. A board member hurried toward us, her smile stretched too wide to be genuine. "Mr. Rowan, we didn't expect you to leave the stage so soon. The press still needs." Her words died when she finally looked at me with recognition. "And this must be the nurse." Her tone teetered between fascination and judgment. Caleb nodded calmly. "This is Nora Hayes." The woman's eyes flickered with something calculating. "Well, isn't this quite a story?" I forced a polite smile, but it felt like my throat was closing. Caleb leaned toward me and whispered, "Breathe." But breathing didn't help when the whispers around us grew louder. "Isn't she the nurse who got a disciplinary citation? Why would someone like him be involved with her? Do you think she knew who he really was?" My chest tightened so sharply it almost hurt. Before tonight, only a handful of people had known about the reprimand on my record. Now it felt like the whole city was discussing it. Caleb ushered me toward an exit on the far side of the room, but before we could reach it, Ryan materialized in front of us like a ghost from a life I no longer wanted. His tailored suit gleamed under the lights, the perfect shell for the smug superiority on his face. "Well, well," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "this explains everything." Caleb stiffened beside me but stayed silent. Ryan continued, "I wondered how a nurse who could barely afford rent paid for her mother's treatments. But now it makes sense." My blood turned cold. Ryan don't. He ignored me. She knew exactly who he was. Played the perfect Florence Nightingale until he opened his wallet. Heat surged up my neck, humiliation clawing at my chest. Caleb stepped forward, his voice steady but blade sharp. "I won't let you speak to her like that." Ryan scoffed. "Of course you won't. You're her golden ticket." A murmur rippled through the crowd, the kind that always follows a scandal forming in real time. People pulled out their phones, some filmed. The air smelled of perfume and money and hunger for drama. Caleb moved closer to me, his presence warm and protective, but I could feel the pressure building behind my ribs, the certainty that everything was collapsing again. "For your information," I said, my voice shaking, but louder than I expected. I didn't even know his name when I helped him. I didn't care who he was. Ryan chuckled a cold, disbelieving sound. "Sure you didn't, because people just give away $40,000 to strangers all the time." His words stabbed deep because the truth was even I sometimes questioned why fate had twisted this way. But before I could respond, a sharp voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." It was the hospital's chief nursing officer. Her heels clicked against the marble as she approached, her expression unreadable. "Nora," she said, "I need to speak with you privately." The whole room seemed to lean in. I swallowed hard. "About what?" Her eyes shifted between me and Caleb. "About allegations made earlier this evening suggesting you may have engaged in unethical conduct while working in the ER. My stomach plummeted. Ryan folded his arms triumphantly. Caleb's jaw tightened. I could barely form words. "What allegations that you accepted financial favors in exchange for care?" she said bluntly. A gust of humiliation hit me so hard my vision blurred. "That's not true," I whispered. "I didn't even know." "We will conduct a full investigation," she said. "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending review." Gasps spread through the ballroom like wind sweeping across tall grass. I felt my knees weaken. Suspended. In front of donors, in front of co-workers, in front of Caleb. Ryan allowed himself a tiny victorious smirk. "See?" he murmured just loud enough for a few people to hear. "I told you. I wanted to disappear, evaporate, melt into the marble floor." Caleb's hand found mine, gripping tightly. "You don't have to say anything right now," he whispered. "You're overwhelmed." But overwhelm wasn't the word. It felt more like drowning. The Cino gave me a formal nod before turning away, leaving me standing under 1,000 judging eyes. The energy in the room had shifted from elegant gala to something closer to a courtroom where I was the defendant, and the verdict was already whispered between clinking glasses. Caleb angled his body protectively in front of me. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get out of here." But before we could leave, a microphone screeched near the stage where the event's MC announced media interviews with Mr. Rowan will begin in 15 minutes. Caleb exhaled sharply, frustration flickering across his features. "Nora, I don't want to leave you alone, but go," I said softly, surprising even myself. "This is your world. You have obligations." His eyes darkened. "Not more important than you." "Please," I whispered. "If you don't go, they'll create more rumors. I'll be fine." It was a lie, but it was all I could manage. He hesitated for several long beats, then reluctantly nodded. "I'll find you as soon as I can." When he walked away toward the stage, the crowd seemed to part for him with admiration. For me, the crowd closed in with suspicion. I slipped out of the ballroom unnoticed except for a few lingering looks, heavy with assumptions. The hallway outside felt colder, brighter, more exposed. I sank onto a bench and pressed my palms to my eyes, fighting the tremor in my breath. Within minutes, notifications flooded my phone. Trending hashtags, alerts, gossip. Someone had already posted a blurry photo of me standing beside Caleb captioned, "Nurse, caught in Millionaire scandal." My heart cracked. All I had ever done was help someone who needed it. Now the world had rewritten that moment into something dirty. After everything I had survived, the exhaustion, the debt, the humiliation. This was the moment that nearly broke me. The world had judged me without even knowing my name. But as I stared at the glowing screen, my hands still shaking, one realization began to push through the panic like a small, stubborn ember refusing to die. Caleb believed me. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to climb out of this storm. I spent the next morning in a fog so thick it felt like the world around me had a slight echo, as if every sound bounced off the ache inside my chest before reaching my ears. I barely slept after fleeing the gala. I lay awake replaying every stare, every whisper, every moment when people I had never met decided I must be guilty. By sunrise, the hospital had already emailed me my official suspension notice. Pending review, clean out locker, no access to patient floors. It felt like losing my identity all over again. Nursing was the only thing I had ever been good at, the one part of my life that felt meaningful even when everything else fell apart. Now, even that had been stripped from me because I helped someone when no one else would. By the time afternoon light leaked through my blinds, I was exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical. My mother called from the next room, her voice warm but worried. "Nora! Sweetheart, you should eat something." "I will in a minute," I lied, staring at my silent phone. No call from the hospital. No call from Caleb. A part of me wondered if he regretted stepping into the spotlight with me. Maybe he decided keeping distance was safer. I wouldn't blame him. People like me didn't belong in the world he lived in. Just as that sinking thought threatened to swallow me, a sudden knock rattled the front door. My heart lurched. I wasn't expecting anyone. I tucked my hair behind my ears, wiped my eyes, and opened the door. Caleb stood there. Not in a tux, not polished, not composed. He wore a simple dark sweater and jeans, his hair slightly messy as if he had raked his hands through it repeatedly. He looked tired but certain. "Nora," he said softly, as though saying my name pulled breath from his chest. Relief crashed over me so suddenly that my knees weakened. "You came." He stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. "I should have come last night, but the press swarmed me. I couldn't get away. I hated leaving you alone." I swallowed, unsure how to absorb the comfort in his voice. "It's okay. None of this is your fault." His expression tightened. "It feels like it is. If I had handled things differently, you wouldn't be under fire." "I helped you," I said. "That's all." He held my gaze for a long, quiet moment. "Let me take you somewhere." I blinked. Where? Somewhere quiet. Somewhere that belongs to me, not the version of me the world thinks it knows. There was something almost fragile under his confidence, something that felt like trust. I glanced toward my mother's room. "Go," she called out softly, as if she had sensed everything from behind her door. "You need fresh air." Caleb waited until I grabbed my coat, then guided me outside to a sleek black car that looked nothing like the vehicles he used for public appearances. "This is mine," he said, noticing my hesitation. No chauffeur, no headlines. The drive took nearly 40 minutes out of the city, the skyline shrinking behind us as tall buildings gave way to quiet neighborhoods, then open stretches of land. I didn't ask questions. I just watched him occasionally from the corner of my eye, noticing the tension in his jaw, the faint shadow of worry etched across his brow. Eventually, he turned into a gravel lot beside a humble brick building with a faded sign reading Rowan Community Center. Children's laughter echoed faintly from somewhere behind it. I frowned. "This is yours." "Yes," he said softly. "One of the only things I kept when I pulled away from my family's empire." He opened my door gently, offering a hand. "Come on, I want you to see something." Inside the center was warm, buzzing with quiet life. Rooms filled with donated books and shelves of warm blankets. A small medical station stocked with first aid supplies. Volunteers sorting boxes of winter coats. In one corner, a few older men played cards sipping hot coffee from mismatched mugs. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and clean laundry. It felt nothing like the cold marble world I'd seen at the gala. "I fund almost everything here, anonymously," Caleb said, walking beside me, his hands in his pockets. "After my sister died, I realized how many people fall through the cracks. I didn't want her death to be just another chapter in a tragic story." His voice softened, tinged with grief. "She struggled with a rare condition most of her life. When she passed, my family turned it into a publicity project. I needed to step away from all that noise." I listened quietly, feeling the weight in his words. "Why disguise yourself as homeless?" I asked gently. He exhaled. "I needed to know if people were kind because they cared or because of my last name. I needed to feel human again. I needed someone to see me without seeing everything attached to me." His gaze met mine, a flicker of vulnerability shining through. "And then you did." Warmth bloomed in my chest, so unexpected that I looked away. We stepped into a storage room where shelves of hygiene kits, food bundles, and donated clothing lined the walls. "This center is the only thing that ever made me feel like my life had purpose," he said. "And I have never shown it to anyone." I turned toward him slowly. "Why me?" His expression softened into something warm and raw. "Because you remind me of who I want to be." My breath caught. He stepped closer, but not in a way that crowded me. It felt gentle, almost reverent. "Last night showed me how cruel the world can be. But you still stood there. You still tried to protect your dignity even when everyone judged you." He swallowed hard. "I want you to know that I believe you. Completely. Unconditionally. And I want you to see the parts of my life I don't show anyone." Emotion swelled in my chest, thick and painful and strangely hopeful. "Caleb," I whispered, "I don't know if I can handle more chaos." "I'm not asking you to," he replied softly. "I'm asking you to let me walk beside you while you face it." I stared at him, the quiet sincerity in his eyes melting something I had kept locked for years. Then he reached out very slowly, giving me time to step back if I wanted. I didn't. His hand brushed mine, and the contact felt grounding, not demanding. "There is something else I want to show you," he murmured. Before I could ask what, he smiled gently. "But it deserves its own night." He squeezed my hand once, then let go. Tonight was for truth. I exhaled a shaky breath, feeling both steadier and more unraveled than before. Being seen this deeply was terrifying, and beautiful, and real. Caleb walked me back to the car, but paused before opening the door. "Nora," he said, "whatever happens next, you won't face it alone." For the first time in days, I believed him. The next few days passed in a blur that felt strangely weightless, as if time had loosened its grip on me. Every morning I woke feeling suspended between two worlds, the one where I had been humiliated, judged, suspended from work, and pushed to the edge of despair, and this new world forming quietly around me with Caleb at its center. He didn't overwhelm me, didn't push or pry. He sent simple messages checking on my mother, brought groceries without making a show of it, and invited me to walk along the river after his meetings. It felt peaceful in a way that made me nervous, like calm before an emotional storm I didn't know how to prepare for. On the fourth evening, he texted, "Are you free tonight? I want to show you something." My pulse jittered. I stared at the screen longer than necessary before typing yes. He picked me up just after sunset. The sky was still streaked with gold and lavender, a soft glow resting on his features when I stepped into the car. He didn't tell me where we were going, only smiled with a small secret warmth that made my stomach tighten. After 20 minutes, the car slowed near the edge of town. Ahead of us, a rooftop structure rose above a converted warehouse building. Twinkling lights hung in soft arcs illuminating wooden beams and a small greenhouse-like enclosure built with reclaimed glass. The entire scene looked like it had been quietly waiting for someone. Waiting for us. "Caleb," I whispered, breath catching. "What is this?" "Come see," he said, leading me up the external stairs. At the top, a warm night breeze brushed against my face, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. A small table with simple ceramic plates sat in the center, surrounded by candles in mason jars. Soft music played from an old speaker tucked near the railing. It was beautiful, but not extravagant. Not the kind of beauty meant to impress donors or board members. It was the kind made from intention. His intention. "You created all this?" I asked. "I did," he said simply. "I wanted to give you a night without noise. No noise. No gossip. No fear. No headlines. Just us." My heart thudded unprepared for the tenderness of the moment. We sat down and ate a simple dinner. He cooked himself pasta, roasted vegetables, fresh bread from a local bakery. "I learned to cook when I lived alone for a while," he said. "Turns out it's easier to keep a low profile if you know how to feed yourself." I laughed softly, and something about the sound seemed to ease a tension in him I hadn't even noticed. We talked for hours, about my mother's progress with her medication, about his sister and how losing her fractured something inside him he hadn't known how to repair, about the loneliness we both carried like invisible bruises. Eventually, he stood and walked to the greenhouse structure. "There's something else," he said, holding out his hand. "Will you come here with me?" My pulse kicked high as I followed him inside. Twinkling lights lined the wooden frame. Potted plants hung from the ceiling, casting soft shadows across the floor. And in the center, a single wooden bench. He guided me to sit, then took a slow breath as if steadying himself. "Nora," he began, voice low and unguarded, "I want you to know that everything I am going to say comes from the quietest part of me, the part I never let anyone see." I froze, feeling the moment shift around us. "The night you helped me," he continued, "I wasn't just lost. I was broken. I didn't trust anyone. I didn't even trust myself." His eyes glistened under the soft lights. "But you didn't see a broken man. You saw a person who mattered. And no one had looked at me that way in years." My throat tightened painfully. He stepped closer, kneeling not dramatically, not ceremoniously, but gently, as though lowering himself into something sacred. My breath stilled. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. My chest constricted, not because of fear, but because of the overwhelming tenderness in his gaze. "Nora Hayes," he said softly, "I don't want our story to begin with disguise and chaos. I want our story to begin right here with truth. You showed me what unconditional kindness looks like. You reminded me what it means to be human, to feel, to hope again. I love you." My breath shook. Tears gathered instantly, hot and uninvited. "I don't want to promise you the kind of life my family expects," he whispered. "I want to promise you the kind of life we build together. Real, kind, brave." He opened the box, revealing a simple ring. Nothing flashy. A single stone set in a silver band. A symbol of sincerity, not status. "Will you marry me?" The world tilted, then steadied. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I could only hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, the air thick with disbelief and longing. "Caleb," I finally managed, wiping a tear from my cheek. "Why me? You could be with anyone. Someone polished. Someone perfect. Someone who won't pull you into scandal every time she tries to help someone." He reached up, brushing a tear with his thumb. "I don't want polished. I want you. The woman who gave her last dollar to a stranger. The woman who works herself to exhaustion to take care of her mother. The woman who stood in front of hundreds of people and chose dignity over approval. His voice trembled. "You're the bravest person I've ever met." My heart cracked open. Completely. Slowly, I lifted my shaking hand. "Yes," I whispered, then stronger. "Yes, I will marry you." His breath left in a soft rush of relief as he slid the ring onto my finger. Then he leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine. "You just changed my whole life," he murmured. "No," I whispered back. "You helped me take mine back." Outside, the city lights flickered softly against the night sky. Inside, we held onto each other in a greenhouse full of soft shadows and new beginnings. And for the first time in years, I felt truly chosen, truly safe, truly loved. The weeks after Caleb's proposal unfolded like the world had finally stopped pushing against me and started opening gently at the seams. It did not happen all at once. Life never hands you peace in a single breath. It comes slowly through a series of small moments that begin to stitch together the parts of you that were torn. The first shift happened at the hospital. I returned for a meeting with the administration, fully expecting another round of suspicion and judgment. I had prepared documents proving the legitimacy of the cashier's check and a statement explaining everything that had happened, though even as I held them, I felt that familiar ache low in my stomach. I knew what people whispered. I had heard fragments of it in the hallways. Social climber, gold digger, nurse who seduced a disguised millionaire. The air felt thick as I sat across from the board. But instead of cold stares, I saw something else. Uncertainty, regret, and maybe even shame. The director cleared his throat and slid a folder toward me. "Ms. Hayes, after our internal review and after receiving confirmation directly from Mr. Rowan himself, we want to formally apologize for the distress caused by the earlier investigation." My breath caught. "You did nothing wrong," he added quietly. "In fact, he told us you embodied exactly what compassionate care should look like. We're reinstating your full pay. And," he exhaled, "we would like to award you our annual Staff of Excellence recognition." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I felt the weight of every shift I had pushed through while exhausted, every humiliation from coworkers, every accusation that I wanted something from a man I had cared for with nothing to gain. It all swelled inside me in a single hot pulse of release. When I stepped out into the hallway, I nearly collided with Alicia, who threw her arms around me. "You deserved this more than anyone," she whispered fiercely. Even Janelle, the coworker who had once rolled her eyes at me helping a homeless patient, walked over with an awkward sincerity in her expression. "I was wrong about you," she said simply. "Truly, sometimes healing comes from the people you least expect." The second shift came with my mother. Her treatments improved drastically with stable medication, and she grew stronger by the day. The first time she walked from the living room to the balcony without needing my arm, I nearly cried from relief. She insisted on taking a small part in the wedding planning, even though I told her not to push herself. One afternoon, while arranging flowers at the dining table, she looked up with that tired but bright smile I knew so well. "Nora," she said softly, "I always prayed life would send someone who saw your worth the way I do." And then she added something that broke me open. "Thank you for choosing kindness even when the world made you pay for it." The third shift came from the world outside our home. When Caleb went public about the truth of his experience, the media narrative turned. Headlines shifted from suspicion to admiration. People began praising the story of a nurse who treated a man with dignity before knowing who he was. Not everyone apologized, of course. Ryan avoided me entirely, though rumor had it that an internal audit uncovered questionable insurance practices he'd been quietly benefiting from. Soft karma. Not dramatic or vengeful, but the kind life eventually hands out when arrogance blinds someone to consequence. And maybe that was enough. Caleb and I spent mornings working together on plans for a new organization he wanted to build. One he insisted should carry my influence as much as his resources. We named it the Rowan Hayes Foundation, an organization designed to help patients who fell between the cracks of medical financial aid. People like my mother. People like the ones I had held the hands of in the ER for years. People whose stories were often forgotten as soon as they left the hospital doors. Planning it made me feel like the girl I had once been before life bruised me, someone who believed she could change something in the world, even if she only had her two hands. Then came the wedding. A quiet autumn evening, crisp air tinged with the scent of pine. We chose a small clearing near the botanical conservatory, surrounded by warm string lights and tall trees that swayed gently in the breeze. It was nothing like the extravagant ceremonies philanthropy families often held, and that was exactly why it felt perfect. My mother walked me down the aisle, slowly leaning on her polished cane, her eyes shining with more pride than I had ever seen. A handful of coworkers, a few of Caleb's close friends, and the program director from the shelter stood waiting. No one looked at us with expectation. No one judged our clothes or our past. They looked at us with warmth. Caleb stood beneath the archway built from reclaimed wood, wearing a navy suit that made his eyes look softer, deeper. His expression when he saw me made my breath tremble, not because it was dramatic or theatrical, but because it was full of meaning, full of memory, full of the quiet kind of love that grows in the cracks where pain once lived. When we exchanged vows, his voice broke for a moment. "You saved me the night you chose to treat me like a man worth saving," he said. "I promise to spend the rest of my life honoring the kindness that brought us together." My vow came with tears clinging to my lashes as I spoke the truth I had carried since the night I gave away my last dollar. "You reminded me that the world may try to take everything from us, but it cannot take who we choose to be. And I choose kindness. With you. For us." When the officiant said we were husband and wife, the world did not erupt into applause like in movies. Instead, there was a soft wave of clapping, a sound full of sincerity, a sound that felt like coming home. After the ceremony, as we stood beneath the glowing lights, Caleb wrapped his arm around my waist and whispered near my temple, "Nora, I hope you know this. You did not win because I am wealthy. You won because your heart is extraordinary." I leaned into him, feeling the truth of his words settle deep in my bones. The night breeze lifted the hem of my dress. The leaves rustled overhead like a quiet promise. And in that moment, everything came full circle. I did not need revenge. I did not need to prove anything to the people who once belittled me. I had built a life rooted in dignity, compassion, and love. A life where my mother was safe. A life where my work mattered. A life where kindness had been returned to me tenfold. In the end, kindness won, and so did I. Sometimes life breaks us in the quietest ways. Sometimes it happens in the middle of a crowded room or in a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning or on an ordinary day when we think we have nothing left to give. Maybe you have been there too. Maybe you have known what it feels like to be dismissed, to be judged, to stand in a place where no one sees the weight you are carrying. Or maybe you have been the person who gave your last dollar to help someone who looked even more lost than you. If this story touched something in you, it is because you understand one of the deepest truths about being human. Kindness rarely looks glamorous, but it always leaves a mark far bigger than we imagine. We live in a world that often values the loud, the wealthy, the powerful. A world that sometimes convinces us that unless we shine, we don't matter. But stories like Nora and Caleb remind us that the smallest acts of compassion can rewrite futures, heal wounds we cannot see, and bring people together in ways we never expect. Maybe you have been the one who showed kindness when no one was watching. Maybe you were judged for it, laughed at, told you were naive or foolish. Maybe someone walked out of your life when you needed them most. Or maybe, like Nora, you kept going anyway, kept choosing the softer road, even when the world spit you out. If that is you, I want you to hear this. The world needs more people like you. People who stay gentle in a society that rewards the opposite. People who help without expecting anything. People who still believe in goodness even when life has not been fair. And if you are watching this story right now, it means you are exactly that kind of person. You would not still be here if your heart had hardened. You would not still be here if you did not believe even a little that kindness can win. And maybe that is why this story found you, because maybe you needed a reminder that your kindness has never been wasted. Even when it felt invisible, even when no one thanked you, even when it cost you something. Someone out there remembers it. Someone out there was changed by it. And maybe, just like Caleb returned to Nora life, is preparing a moment where the good you gave out will circle back to you in a way you never saw coming. So if you are tired, if you are carrying more than you say out loud, if you are trying to stay hopeful in a world that keeps testing you, I hope this story gives you the gentle lift your heart needed, because you deserve love that chooses you. You deserve people who see your worth without needing a spotlight to highlight it. You deserve moments of peace after years of storms. And you deserve a life where your compassion is your strength, not something others use against you. If Nora's journey reminded you of your own battles, your own heartbreaks, your own victories earned the hard way, then stay with us. This channel was made for people like you, people who still believe in the power of a soft voice, people who have survived storms without losing themselves, people who know that real wealth is not money, but the ability to love without condition. We tell stories for you. Stories that touch the ache in your chest. Stories that remind you that even when life feels unbearably heavy, there is always a turning point waiting just one breath away. Stories that prove again and again that kindness may bend, but it does not break. And in the end, kindness wins. If this story held your heart even for a moment, I invite you to stay with us, to subscribe, to join a community where your experiences matter, your compassion matters, and your journey matters. Because you belong in a place where your softness is celebrated, not punished, where your struggles are understood, where your victories, big or small, are honored. Thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you for feeling this story. And thank you for being the kind of person who still believes in hope. We will see you in the next story.